Hey guys, we're going to be learning more about cells now that we've learned how to use the microscope to make some of those observations. And so this is going to be a repeat of what we're going to do live in class, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to be able to review the topic on your own time. So cells are we know that the cell theory tells us that all living things are made up of cells. They are the basic building blocks of all living things, whether those living things are unicellular, single celled organisms, or whether they're multicellular like you and me. So we have trillions of cells in our body, and and sorry, somebody's messaging. Sorry about that. We have trillions of cells in our body. So the more complex the organism, of course, the more cells that are going to be there. But there are a lot of really cool organisms that are single celled organisms like bacteria and protists. So we'll be looking at some of those under the microscope as well, particularly the protists. Okay. The next part of cell theory tells us that cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. And so there are a lot of different kinds of cells. Cells will differentiate, specialize to do a specific function. That's why the skin cells in your body are different. There are different types of skin cells, different shapes and structures that do different functions, as well as the muscle cells being different from skin cells. There are three types of muscle cells, and they are each different in some way in structure and function. So, think of cells as like the Legos in a Lego castle that you build. So the entire organism would be the castle, and then all of the individual Lego pieces, whether they're square or round or rectangular, or have two knobs or eight knobs or one knob, no matter what they are, those are each going to represent the different types of cells, and all of those cells together create the structure of the entire Lego castle. Okay. And then the last part of cell theory tells us that cells come from other cells. They come from pre existing cells. They don't just magically appear, they don't just magically develop from, water or mud or whatever. And they come from pre existing cells of the same kind. That's why a frog cell is going to make more frog skin cells and not human skin cells. Okay. So there are differences and variations between the different types of cells in organisms as well, between organisms as well. Okay, so that's the cell theory. We've looked at a couple of things to help us understand cell theory better in class, but that's a quick review of cell theory. Okay, now we talk about cells because remember, they're the basic unit of structure and function for the organism. And so everything that happens in your body, any process that happens, any function, any structure in your body starts on the cellular level. It starts with cells. Okay. So when we talk about cell function, we're talking about functions that help your body be balanced and healthy and stay alive. Okay. So one of the big things that cells do is provide that structure. So trees and plants, like a rose bush is shaped the way it is, has the structure it has because of the cells that make it up. Okay. And plant cells are different from animal cells because we're not really rigid like a plant, right? We're really flexible. You can, push on your skin and it'll sink in. Your skin is really flexible, which is different from like the outer part, like the trunk, the bark on a trunk of a tree, right? And that's because the cells are different, but all of the cells, whether they're plant cells or animal cells or bacteria cells, they provide the structure for that organism. Okay. Another important thing that cells do is they contain all of your genetic information. So, all of the instruction booklet, the code for who you are, is in that genetic material, in the DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. The DNA holds the genetic code for the organism. And that DNA is found in the nucleus. We'll talk about those later. The nucleus, or the center of every cell in your body. Okay. So, cells, that's a really, really important part, because that is the instruction book. That's the code for who the organism is. And so that's a really important cell function. Another extremely important cell function is the conversion of food energy, glucose, which you get when you eat, when you consume other organisms, right? Now, producers make their own food energy, but they also have to convert that glucose into ATP, which is another form of energy that your cells can actually use to do their work. Okay, so this process is called cellular respiration. We will look at it a little bit more closely later on. But cellular respiration is a process that converts glucose with oxygen to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is an energy form that your cells can use to do their jobs. Okay. Another function of cells, another important function, is that they do things like secrete different substances like hormones and things like that. Some cells transport materials, like red blood cells transport oxygen throughout all parts of your body. Um, the blood also carries your nutrients. So when you digest food and it goes through your stomach and into your intestine, through the walls of the intestine, those nutrients get absorbed, glucose and other stuff, and it gets picked up by your blood, and the blood carries it or transports those to everywhere that it's needed, to any cell that needs some of those nutrients. Okay. Another important function, which you guys will learn a little bit more about when you get up into 7th and 8th grade, when we talk about DNA and genetics more. One of the main functions of cells is to produce proteins, because many of the processes and structures in your body are proteins. So everything from enzymes that help different chemical reactions happen in your body. One example would be salivary amylase. That is an enzyme that's found in your saliva, and it helps to start the digestion process. So as soon as you put food in your mouth and you start chewing it and mixing it with the saliva in your mouth, there is salivary amylase that's starting to break down the carbohydrates in particular. Okay, and enzymes are proteins. Now, proteins carry out so many important functions in your body. One example, if we go back to the red blood cells carrying oxygen, red blood cells can carry oxygen because of a protein called hemoglobin. So red blood cells have a lot of hemoglobin, and that hemoglobin is able to attach to the oxygen and carry it throughout your body. Okay, so the production of proteins and other substances are extremely important, an extremely important function that cells do. Okay, now let's start talking about the structures that make up cells. We call those organelles. Organelles. So those are the individual structures and parts that make up the cell. We're not going to look at all of the organelles for 6th grade. We have reduced it to a certain number. So we're going to focus on those. Any of the organelles that you want to learn about in addition to these is absolutely fine, and that's going to help you move towards exemplary if that's your goal. Okay. All right. So the first one, let me go back. So this, where my pointer is, that is the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is kind of like a skin that covers the entire cell. Now, if you do a zoom in close up look at the cell membrane, so we would say this is inside the cell, and this is a little section of the cell membrane, and this is outside the cell. So the structure of the cell membrane is these lipids. Now, lipid is just the fancy scientific name for fats. So the cell membrane is made up of a double layer of fats. Okay, and then within those fats, there are some protein molecules that create these little tunnels or openings that allow substances to pass into and out of the cell. Pretty cool, right? So this is the main structure of the cell membrane. And that structure allows the function of the cell membrane to happen. So the function of the cell membrane is to control what goes in and out of the cell. Okay. So some things are made in a cell and it has to go out to other parts of the body. And some things are outside of the cell. For example, those nutrients that you ate and then absorbed into your digestive system. Okay. So then those nutrients would have to be able to pass into the cell in order for them to be used. Okay. So the cell membrane is the organelle that forms the outer layer of the cell, and it controls what goes in and out of the cell. Okay, and again, here's the cell membrane. Plant cells have cell membranes too. It's just that they have another outer layer outside of the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is here on the inside, and then on the outside is a cell wall. We'll talk a little bit more about the cell wall later, but all cells have cell membranes. Okay. Next is the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm is this gel-like liquid. It's liquidy gel. But the in between all of the organelles inside the cell is not empty space. It's filled with this cytoplasm. Okay. So the cytoplasm fills all of those spaces between the cell membrane and the other organelles. So between the nucleus and the cell membrane and the mitochondria, everything that's in the cell is in this cytoplasm. So it fills it. It's like putting, let's say you have a water balloon and you put some little toys on the inside and then you fill up the balloon with water. So the water would be like the cytoplasm, and then all the little toys would be like the other organelles inside the cell. Now, I like to think of the cytoplasm as like the water in a pool, because the if the pool was empty and there was no water, then you wouldn't be able to float in it. You wouldn't be able to, stay up in the water. You wouldn't be able to swim. And so the cytoplasm allows a lot of substances to be able to move throughout the cell. So that's the cytoplasm. And so that's all of this, what looks to be empty space in between all of the other organelles and the cell membrane, but it is actually a clear gel-like fluid. And it's found in plant cells as well. All cells have cytoplasm. Okay, this next one are the vacuoles. Vacuoles are super cool. And this is not an animal cell. This is not a plant cell. This is a protist cell. Protists are unicellular organisms, and this one is an amoeba. So this is a really good drawing of an amoeba. And I'm using it for vacuoles just because amoebas have pretty large vacuoles, and they have a lot of different kinds of vacuoles. Okay. You don't have to worry about what the different kinds are. Just notice that they are different and they're used for different things. Okay. So vacuoles are like these sacs, and they are storage for food or water. Now, animal cells and plant cells both have vacuoles as well. In animal cells, they're usually a bit smaller than in other cells. The ones in the amoeba can be really big or pretty small. But then if you look at, let me go back to the plant cell, the vacuole in the plant cell is quite big, and a lot of them hold water. And that's because, plants do photosynthesis and they have to have water to do photosynthesis. So when it's stored in the vacuole, then it's easy access for the cells to be able to do photosynthesis because the water is right there. Okay. All right, moving right along. The next organelle we're going to talk about are the mitochondria. Now, mitochondria is plural. The singular is mitochondrion, D-R-I-O-N. The mitochondria are these organelles that are kind of like a power plant. Now, we often give mitochondria the nickname powerhouse of the cell, and that's because this is where that food energy, that glucose, gets converted into ATP. Now, that process, remember, is called cellular respiration. And cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria where it converts glucose with oxygen into adenosine triphosphate, which is ATP. Okay. Now, even producers have to do cellular respiration. They have to have mitochondria because even though they're producing glucose, their cells also have to convert it into ATP in order to do their functions. Okay. So the mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, and it is where cellular respiration happens. So here are some mitochondria in the animal cell. Just a little side note, if you have cells that require a lot of energy and consistently need a lot of energy, for example, your muscle cells, because every time you move, you're using your muscle cells, so that requires energy, right? When you blink, when you breathe, your digestion is happening all the time. Um, uh, when you're talking, when anything that you're doing, blinking, those kinds of movements require muscles, right? And so muscle cells will have a lot more mitochondria because they are constantly requiring energy. And mitochondria is where the ATP is produced. So when you look at muscle cells, especially, sometimes they look striped, and it's because they have so many mitochondria. They're just like lined up in these little striped lines, dark lines. Okay. So that's mitochondria. Plants also have them. The next organelle is the nucleus. Now, the nucleus is considered the control center of the cell. It's like the boss of the cell, and that is where that DNA is located. So the nucleus holds your DNA, which is the genetic code for everything about you, from eye color to the shape of your toes. Everything. Okay. So the nucleus is usually located kind of in the center, or it's one of the organelles that's the easiest to see when you're using a microscope. So you guys will be able to see nuclei, which is the plural, nuclei. You'll be able to see the nuclei pretty easily in all of the slides that we're looking at, whether it's plant or animal or protist. Okay. So in the animal cell, here's the nucleus. Now, this around here, that is a different organelle. It's called the endoplasmic reticulum. You guys are not required to know that, but I just wanted to tell you so that you would know it. And it's usually wrapped around the nucleus just because it transports a lot of materials from the nucleus out into the rest of the cell. But this is the nucleus. It's located in the center, and this is where your DNA is located. Plant cells also have a nucleus, and here's the drawing of that one. Okay, now plant and animal cells have a lot of things in common. For example, they have cell membrane, they have vacuoles, they both have mitochondria, they both have a nucleus, they both have a cytoplasm. Okay, but they are also different. Okay, so one different organelle that is found in plant cells and also in bacterial cells is a cell wall. So the cell wall is located outside of the cell membrane. It is different from the cell membrane because it's much stiffer and rigid. So, and it has a different like structure. Like it's not, you know how the cell membrane is proteins and fats, lipids. The cell wall is typically a different substance, and it depends on the organism you're looking at. Plants are cellulose mainly is the main component of the cell wall. Okay, and the function of the cell wall is to give another layer of protection and also to give the cells some of that rigidity. Because if the plant cells didn't have a cell wall, then trees wouldn't, like stand up. Plants wouldn't stand up. They would be like a blob because they don't have bones like us, right? So it's our bones and our muscles that kind of give us our structure, but it's the fact that plant cells have cell walls that keep them rigid and give them shape. Okay. And it, again, another layer of protection. So plant cells have those cell walls, which is the thick outer covering for strength and rigidity and protection. All right. And that is here on the outside of the cell membrane. So the entire cell is surrounded by the cell wall. One other thing that plant cells have that animal cells don't are chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are organelles that contain chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, if you remember, is that magic pigment that traps light energy from the sun to allow the producers to do photosynthesis. Okay, so the chloroplast is the organelle that holds the chlorophyll. So it's a little bit different. The chlorophyll is the pigment, and the chloroplast is the little membrane bound organelle that holds the chlorophyll. Okay. Now, animal cells don't do photosynthesis, so they don't need chlorophyll, and therefore they don't have chloroplasts to hold the chlorophyll. Okay. But you will find in plant cells, you will always find chloroplasts in all the green parts of the plant. And that's because chlorophyll is green. And so the chloroplasts hold all of that green pigment. So sometimes, even if you don't have the cell dyed at all, you will be able to see the green chlorophyll, which is really cool, the little chloroplasts, because they are such a bright green as compared to the rest of the cell. The rest of the cell is usually kind of clear almost. Okay. All right. So in class, you will be given diagrams of both the animal cell and the plant cell. You're going to color them, make them really nice and, really good models of the cell. And then you're going to label them, and you're also going to include details about the function of each of those organelles. So that's the plan for class. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've learned a lot, and I'll see you in class.